heartfelt law, society, scholarship, and fandom. Welcome to Semantic Shenanigans.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to episode 3 of Semantic Shenanigans. My name is Janet Gershon-Siegel, and she is the Lucy to my Ethel, the Cagney to my Lacey, and of course the Shirley to my Laverne. It is Shanna Gilkison.
Hey, wait, I want to be Laverne.
You want to be Laverne?
Well,
with the big L?
Huh?
With the big L?
Yeah, I actually had a factory job for a while, and they threatened to put an L on my smock because the other girl was always Shirley that I hung out with. But, you know, that's okay, because Shirley has boo-boo kitty, so maybe that is apropos.
And Shirley's got the big ragu, too, you know? You get Carmine.
I don't know. He's not my type, but I don't have a type, so I guess it doesn't matter.
I end up with the guy who became David St. Hubbins, so I'm happy.
Oh, well, right on. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm single, so, you know, if you know a nice fella...
Yes.
Now you know why I'm single.
Yes, Semantic Shenanigans, the dating app, will be out soon, I'm sure.
Maybe we should do a dating show soon.
Dating show soon. And so what kind of ice cream would you like to be? All right, on that happy note, we are doing social with the Shenanigans. So what did you do in the last, I don't know, when was the last time we were together? It was for 24 hours of G&T, so what have you been doing for the last month?
So what I've been doing for the last month, not this past weekend, but the weekend before that, I was at the NCAA convention. That's National Council. No, sorry. I am so sorry. National Communication Association.
And Bar and Grill.
Yeah, Bar and Grill. Yeah. No. I'm sorry. When you get into grad school, your life becomes an alphabet soup, and everything's an acronym, and sometimes they just all kind of conflate. But I promise you, it was the National Communication Association convention. And it was pretty cool. I did some touristy things there. My hotel was right by Benjamin Franklin's burial site. So I went in and I took cool old cemetery pictures.
You know?
I walked past the place where they keep the Constitution. I didn't go in, but I took pictures from the outside. And I think that was pretty much it for the touristy stuff. I did, though, this is really cool. I got to meet a friend in fandom, Melissa. She lives in Philadelphia. I know her through Star Trek fandom.
Terrific.
Yeah, and so I actually stayed a couple nights at her house and we hung out, and she took me to some more neighborhoody kind of places by where she lives. So, we visited some cute little shops. There was a cute little pet shop where I bought souvenirs for my cats. We went and saw Arrival at this really cool theater that it's like a restaurant. So there's wait staff that come and take your drink order, and they brought us nachos and things. So it was kind of cool.
Wonderful.
And then my actual purpose there, I was there for 2 presentations. The first one I presented on, it was kind of the concept of the panel was the dismantling of spirituality after 9/11. And so I kind of focused mine on TV and film because that's what I do. And so I talked about dystopia, with The Walking Dead and 28 Days Later, and how that's analogous to the invasion movies during the Cold War era. We kind of had the zombie flicks of the Bush era, and even Star Trek had its way of handling 9/11, but even when it got dystopic, it never lost hope. And I talked about how that's even relevant now because the Star Trek Beyond drew so much from Star Trek Enterprise.
Yes, absolutely. It was definitely almost a sequel to it.
Yeah, so if y'all missed Beyond, then you ripped yourself off. You should go see it. And then the other thing that I, presented on was not really fandom oriented, but I talked about how the death of the film incentives in Michigan is more closely related to the Flint water crisis than you think.
Definitely, it's I'm sure it's changed the economy significantly, and probably in ways that a lot of people don't think.
Yeah, it did change the economy. There's obviously some partisan disagreement as to how it changed the economy. One side is only looking at the fact that it cost us something like $400 million, but the other side is saying, yes, but you're ignoring the fact that the film industry has spent $1.3 billion in our state. So it just, certain party had it in for film ever since they took office and gerrymandered the crap out of the state. So we can't get rid of them.
Well, that stinks. So my news is ever since November started, I've been writing this year's novel. I participate in NaNoWriMo, which is November is National Novel Writing Month, and I've been doing this since 2013. And the 2013 novel is the one that has been published. So I've been trying to get back up to that level since then. So this one is called The Real Hub of the Universe, and it kind of plays on the fact that a lot of local institutions around here refer to Boston as the hub of the universe. So I'm looking at it as the real hub, as in, yeah, there are aliens, but instead of looking at present time, which I think is a little overdone and maybe is a little too easy, instead, the time period is the Victorian era, so it's from about 1876 to probably about 1885 when I'm all said and done. So it's ray guns and hoop skirts.
Wow.
Not hoop skirts, petticoats.
Well, hey, when you make it big with this one, I see a lot of related cosplay in the future.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's not quite steampunky, but it definitely has that feel of that you could put on a long dress and whatever, or you could put on, latex, I suppose, or something like that, and do the whole alien thing. So,
right,
anyway.
Yeah, and maybe some Jane Austen thrown in for good measure.
There is a point where she does read a lot, the main character, and some of her favorite books are Emma and Pamela by Samuel Richardson, and she also happens to get her hands on an early edition of Tom Sawyer, which is from that era as well, which was brand new then. So it's kind of neat seeing how things changed during that time period. It's a very active time period. It's when the telephone is invented. It's when electricity starts to get into houses. You use a railroad or a coach to get from place to place, or a boat for that matter. And the way that people live, it's extraordinarily different. And that's been lots of fun talking about how people live and the stratification between the very rich and the very poor. This main character grew up poor, so she's used to everybody sort of divides a potato into quarters, and okay, there's dinner. Whereas then she goes to work for a family where they're wasting food, and that's just so strange.
Oh, wow. Well, I can't wait to read it when it's done.
Thank you.
Do I get to be first?
If you like, hey, if you want a beta, I'm always happy for that. Let's shall we segue into we got fan mail.
We got fan mail.
Excited. Yay!
Yay! So not too long after we posted the first Semantic Shenanigans file podcast, we got a letter from Beth, and I lost the file. Where is Beth from?
Beth is from, she had gone to Case Western University, so she's from somewhere in the heart of the country, I suppose.
Yay! So academics in the house, yay! So anyway, we just wanted to give a shout out to Beth and thank her very much for just taking a moment to drop us a line and let us know that she liked the show and making us feel really good right out of the box.
Definitely. It's, because sometimes you can feel like you're talking to just about nobody. So thank you so much, Beth. It really it made me all verklempt inside, so I'm so excited.
Beth, don't tell anybody, but you're my favorite.
All right. Shall we begin? Would you like to begin?
Yeah. So, am I taking him to school? Are we going to talk about alpha nerding?
Hell yeah, you betcha.
Okay, so one of the things that you've heard us mention briefly on the show before is this term alpha nerding. So what I thought I'd do for you today is kind of unpack that a little bit and talk about what we mean by that when we say that and why it's annoying and why it happens. So it's kind of related to, but very distinctly different from the idea of the big name fan, or you see that abbreviated as BNF on websites and in social media and stuff. Big name fans are made based usually on their actual contributions to the community. They might be a really popular fanfic writer or zine publisher. They may be a popular fan artist. They may host a popular podcast. Something of that nature, at which point a lot of people in the fandom know who they are, and they get a lot of respect within the community. Alpha nerding is a little bit different in that in some cases I might say that it's a big name fan wannabe.
Okay.
Or it can be, or it's just a way of establishing dominance within the fandom and asserting yourself as superior compared to others. So, go ahead.
So it's like I'm more passionate than you are, or I'm more authentic than you are? Exactly,
and that's exactly where a lot of the behaviors come in that kind of drive other people nuts and turn people off. It kind of goes hand in hand with that gatekeeping behavior that you see, questioning fans' authenticity. Maybe, if you don't know Han Solo's underwear size, you're not a real fan. That kind of thing.
It's 17, right?
I don't know. I guess I'm not a real fan.
I don't even know if that's a size, so we're just going to go with that.
It's been so long since I've had to buy men's underwear. I don't know either, but...
I'm not going to comment about Mr. Chespa's underwear. Not at this moment, okay.
Does he buy his own?
Yes.
Well, good. I guess that's as it should be. So yeah, I don't know. As much as one might speculate about Han Solo's underwear, I guess there's no reason to know for sure unless, you ask George Lucas in passing, or Harrison Ford.
True. Yeah, well, it's sort of this esoterica. I've had people say things to me like, if you don't spend money on models, you're not a fan. Like, what? This is my own discretionary income. I get to choose where it goes. I'm all grown up. I get to do that.
Yeah, and so there's this idea, and that plays really well into something that I picked up. There's a column that I read every so often called Paging Dr. Nerdlove, and every so often he gets some really interesting articles, and one that I keep going back to as a jumping off point for some of my research is one on geek behaviors that turn women off. And I would argue that since it's since the article comes from the perspective of frustrated men that want to date women. There's obviously that heterosexual privileging that's going on right there. But honestly, this would drive people nuts no matter what the situation is. And Dr. Nerdlove, he says, he kind of hits it on the head with the alpha nerding, is that it's the idea that the deeper you are into your geekery, the more dominant you are in the social scene. So nerds will whip out their street cred at any opportunity. And so they'll be like, one of those birds that, puffs up their chests and their throat sacs during mating season kind of thing, But instead of attracting a woman, you're actually like, sending her running because it's just really, really annoying. So it's this idea that, you hierarchies with big name fans and alpha nerds, they kind of start to get constructed. And so the people who are kind of at the top of the ladder, or at least fancy themselves at the top of the ladder, they start policing the fandom, dictating what's appropriate and what's not, and even policing taste.
Which is crazy, this is how could you possibly police taste of people who are, over 18 and competent, even if they aren't?
But we see it all the time in fandom, don't we? This whole idea of my way of enjoying the fandom is the only right way.
Well, I always love the, you're only a good fan if you hate Wesley Crusher. You're only a good fan if you hate Jar Jar Binks. There's got to be somebody who likes him. We all agree that X, Y, Z. Well, that's not true at all. We're intelligent people, and so there's bound to be disagreements simply because, because we have minds of our own. At least I hope so.
Exactly, but we forget all of this because or at least the alpha nerds do, because they're doing it in the name of the purity of the fandom. Yeah, and so this is also where my research kind of starts to take off, because this is also where things can start to get gendered or even ageist. A lot of this alpha nerding behavior gets turned against women, which is ironic considering all of the research suggests that fandom as we know it today, and I'm talking about active fandom, not passive consumption, but I'm talking about like organizing conventions and doing fanfic and fan art. Women have been the organizing and economical driving force behind that. But there's this perception that because it's sci-fi or space opera, whatever you want to call it, it's actually a man's world.
Well, I do look at numbers for G&T and for other sites, that are kind of fandom based, and I definitely see a bigger I wouldn't say participation, but definitely like the followers and whatnot tend to skew more heavily male. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the fandom, because we're still looking at a smaller slice of the fandom.
Right, and that might be something about podcast audiences, or it might be something about, that particular podcast that has more appeal for men. But, a lot of the earlier scholars who looked at fandom, particularly, Henry Jenkins and a few others, it's mostly been a woman's world, at least, and especially at the beginning.
How come I want to say Leroy Jenkins? I'm sorry.
Henry Jenkins. So we get these gatekeeping behaviors. Now the thing that both big name fans and alpha nerds have in common is that they do both have the potential to have some influence over the fandom. With big name fans, though, it's more like what I would say it's more organic and things going viral. So, we know the term headcanon, like, the things that we believe happened between the spaces that we don't see on camera. So the big name fan will, maybe write a story that establishes a headcanon that actually becomes pretty popular. So that's kind of, that evolves into what we call fanon, whereas we see that as the fans generally accept that that's what happened, even though there's no canon statement that that's what happened, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that may have been for Star Trek Enterprise, where they kind of got into some trouble, was that people had a very clear idea of what had happened during that time frame, and then of course the IP holders made their own decisions as to where they wanted things to go, depending on what kind of writing they got out of the writers, what kind of acting they got out of the actors, etc. And a lot of fans sort of balked and said, but that's not how it's supposed to be. Well, but nobody really said how it was supposed to be. Nobody official, certainly.
Right. And unfortunately, or fortunately, fans get pretty attached to their headcanon. Unfortunately for the alpha nerds, the studios and the people with the money don't care about your headcanon.
Of course not. And I think that folks have to remember that fandom, these fandoms, this is big corporate business, and the decisions that they make for how storylines go aren't necessarily what you want, and that's because they make decisions based on all sorts of things that you don't really have any purview of, that you don't really know, such as that somebody's contract is coming up, or an actress just declared that she's gotten pregnant, or they learned that an actor is dying and they have to figure out some way to gracefully, get the character out of the show in a respectful manner. Or somebody says, I'm tapped, I can't really, I'm trying really hard, but I've just got too much writer's block. There's all this stuff going on behind the scenes, and we can sort of guess at it, but we really don't know what's going on behind that curtain.
Yeah, and let's call it what it is too. A lot of times, money is the motivating factor, and it's like, okay, well, we could cater to this niche of loyal and vocal but small part of fandom, or we could do this thing for broader appeal and try to attract more of an audience and be able to sell our sponsorship for more money and thus be able to stay on the air longer.
And to sell to a more desirable demographic. I mean, this is what I know. We come back to Star Trek a lot, but it's also because we both know it very well and we know each other through it. But the truth is that that's a big part of why there's a new timeline, is because there's a need to try to appeal not only to a broader fan base, but also to a younger fan base. The folks who are the original TOS fans, we're getting older, and we ain't gonna be around forever.
And that's a great segue into the next part about alpha nerding that I wanted to talk about. And I know we're going to get mail on this because nobody likes this word. I'm going to say the P word.
Okay.
I'm going to say the P word, and that's privilege.
All right.
Okay, and so before you guys write your angry letters and, start furiously typing your Facebook posts to us and stuff like that, I understand that it's a contentious term, and chances are you don't understand it in the way that we use it in academic circles, particularly in gender studies or race studies. Privilege is an analytical tool. It's not a label. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you because you're white or because you're male, you're evil. And if you even try to insinuate that that's what I'm saying when I bring up this idea of privilege, you're just dead wrong. and I'm not going to have that. This is kind of what, huh?
I just said excellent.
Yeah, no, that's just not happening. And this is kind of what happens when, the masses get a hold of something, either, from the professional world or from the academic world, and it gets misused and kind of distorted. I remember getting into a deep discussion about this on my own Facebook post where, somebody who was not an academic was telling me I'm wrong about how I'm using it, which is kind of funny considering they're not the one who's spent the time and done the work in the classrooms, but whatever. They know it in one context, but not the one that we're using it in. And, that just kind of leads to like all these crazy misunderstandings, and it pisses people off and, all this kind of stuff. So probably the most... You have to understand, too, like if I were to try to teach freshmen about this, we'd be spending an entire semester about this. And what you know about it probably comes from a couple of bite-sized memes that you've seen on Facebook. And so I'm not even going to pretend that I can explain it all perfectly right here, right now, with the time that I have allotted in a podcast. But I'm just going to say that a position of privilege means that where you are situated is the default normal.
Okay, so you're the when we close our eyes but we don't have a description, we think of you.
Right. So a lot of people understand this in the context of race. So our society, white is kind of the default normal. Chances are, if you're white, you don't sit around thinking about the fact that you're white unless you're reminded of it, because you get to experience the world in such a way that race is not a barrier to you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I would say that, and it can be a very, almost a jarring experience when you are in the minority in a group by race, where
right.
you see, this is what was skewered big time in Animal House, where there's a scene where they're in a club and the race percentages are reversed big time, and of course it's played for laughs, but at the same time, those folks feel threatened, or at least certainly that's the way they acted.
Yeah. And so you hit on a very important thing, which I'm going to touch on in just a moment, is that context is what dictates privilege. And also, we have this other heuristic tool called intersectionality that deals with the fact that other dimensions of our identities are going to mitigate privilege. So, we have gender factoring things in. We have class factoring things in. Disability, sexual orientation, all of those things. So, in short, like, just because you're white, it doesn't mean that you're not going to have any problems. If you're a white disabled lesbian, you probably aren't feeling very privileged. But if you were a disabled lesbian of color, you might argue that the white disabled lesbian is probably doing a little bit better in life than you are.
Oh yeah, there's a you don't really want to call it a hierarchy, but I guess that sort of can be what happens. I mean, it's I have an experience that's different from a lot of other people's, which is that I'm an invisible minority. When you're a Jewish person, you can unless somebody specifically talks to you about that, it's nobody knows. And
right.
I've had people express anti-Semitism to me, and because they have no idea that it's a personal attack.
Yeah, and we kind of refer to that as implied privilege, because the default normal is white Christian, and so unless you tell them that you're not a Christian or you give them some visible sign, the assumption is that you are one, because that's the default normal. That's privilege.
And this is how, whenever I say happy holidays, I'm told that's a war on Christmas. I can't even.
Right. So, and this does come back to fandom. I'm kind of working my way into it, but I had to unpack this whole privilege thing so that way people understand what I'm actually talking about when I go in here and apply it to fandom. And your example is perfect, and I'm going to put one that maybe we don't normally think about is when I returned to school to finish my bachelor's degree in 2009. I'm what the euphemism that they use for that is returning adult learner, which in my case meant, hey, drop out, come back,
Got it. Come back, all is forgiven.
Yeah. So, my first experience sitting in a lecture hall in 2009, surrounded by 18 to 20-year-olds who have taken classes and typed papers on computers and not typewriters. Who knew what MLA and APA citation were. I didn't know what those were or how to do them on the computer. As far as I was concerned, a word processor was just a big fancy typewriter at that point. They had privilege compared to me because they were insiders. They were the default normal. College was designed for them. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So me, being 39 years old at the time, I had to figure out other ways to use my computer. I had to figure out what they were talking about when they said, I had to cite my information in my paper a certain way and all this kind of stuff. And there was a learning curve, and I had to get people to help me. And it was taken for granted that I would have certain knowledge when I came in, and I didn't have it because I didn't have the experience. And it wasn't until I found the resources that college offered to give people like me a hand up, like the Writing Center, that I eventually went to work for, and other services geared toward non-traditional students and returning adult learners. It wasn't until I had that extra help that I was able to catch up. So I don't know. I hope that we can see the social allegory in that as well.
Well, when I went for my master's, I was 50 years old, and this is all distance, and so I remember rather vividly somebody commenting in because a lot of this was sort of you would sort of blog back and forth about stuff, and now people would comment about how, oh my God, those 50-year-olds, they're so old, they don't know anything, and having to explain, hello,
yeah,
I'm here too, and I have to know something about this in order to succeed in this class. And maybe you are kind of lumping us all together in a way that is unfair, but also not only that just this group, but also lumping people in an age group together where there's a feeling that people who are 50 are virtually the same as people who are 80, which is, of course, absurd.
And so I would argue then that people like you and me, in the process of taking a college class, are very hyper aware of our age, whereas the 18 to 20 somethings are just going to college. They're not thinking about the fact that they're 18 unless, it means, oh snap, I can't legally drink yet. But in terms of going to college and taking a class, they don't even think about it. They just take it for granted that they can go hit the ground running and, do what the prof says or not and function.
And they don't have a lot of the things that you and I do, which is, you're holding down a job or a relationship, or that it's harder to get up in the morning. It's harder to pack all that in because, you just don't move as quickly as you used to. And, it's just unfortunately the way things are. But, this is not college days, when I was young, way back when. Where you party all day on Saturday and Sunday and roll out of bed on Monday and be, snapped up, ready to work.
Yeah, the good old days.
They're gone forever.
couldn't do that now if I tried. Anyway, so to fold this back into fandom now, I'm ready to do that because I think that I've kind of unpacked this in a way that most people would kind of at least be a little bit on board. And, maybe if you don't completely agree, at least maybe you can see what I'm saying here. So privilege does exist in fandom, and somebody that I've had the privilege to see speak at the conference that I went to in Chicago, Dr. Carrie Lynn Reinhardt, I've become a very big fan of her work and her research in fandom, and I don't know, Janet, I think maybe we should try to get her on the show once to talk about her work, because it's really interesting, so maybe we need to hit her up for that. But a lot of her work has to do with this idea of privilege and fandom, and she does research on fractured fandom and things of that nature. So as I mentioned before, even though research bears out that women, especially in the beginning, have been the driving organizational and economic force leading fandom to where it is now, there's this perception that it's a man's world, it's domain of men. And so men are often in this position of privilege. So you usually see them as the ones who are doing the gatekeeping and the vetting. So, you have to, they'll ask you to prove yourself as a fan. You have to know their obscure trivia question. You have to have been in the fan for X number of years, that kind of thing. It's also kind of like where this stereotype of the fake geek girl comes in, and that's something that women use against each other. It's not just men. In fact, I think it was born out of an internet article of a woman telling fake geek girls to stop it. And, apparently if you were too pretty and too cute and too new to the fandom, you weren't real. So isn't that fabulous? Yes. Women turning on each other. Stop it!
Oh, yes. And it happens again.
Yeah. So you get, but like when it comes to like the comic book store, we hear about this a lot, or even in cosplay situations, the men will test you and test you and test you. Whereas a dude who walks in, who might have even just discovered the fandom yesterday, he doesn't even get questioned. But a woman will be like, oh, you're just in this because your boyfriend likes it. Oh, you're just here for the Buffy comic, like whatever. There's a lot of assumptions that go with that. Now, there is an exception. There are some feminized spaces within fandom, so shipper communities. I think we talked about shippers in episode 1 a little bit, but for those of you who do not know, the word ship is shortened from relationship. So this is when you put two characters romantically together. Those spaces are dominated by women. They tend to be the majority, so the women are going to be the ones who are in a position of privilege, usually, not the men. We also see this with age, and particularly in fandoms like Star Trek or Doctor Who that have a lot of longevity. If you're a newer fan, your authenticity is questioned based on which point you have entered the fandom. So it's happened with every Trek series from Next Generation on. You weren't a real fan because Next Generation was your entry into the fandom. You weren't a real fan because Enterprise was your entry into the fandom. You're not a real fan if the J.J. Abrams films are your entry into the fandom. So while we don't see quite as much misogyny in Trek, we see a lot of ageism, and it's directed toward the younger people. Same thing with Doctor Who, especially if you came in from Chris Eccleston or later, you get questioned by the fans who, were watching it back when, the BBC had like no money and the sets had the production value of a high school play. If you haven't been with the fandom that long, you are not a real fan.
It's very similar to you see this with the Red Sox and with other sports teams. The whole idea of the pink hat fandom, that's often women. There's misogyny that goes along with this, but there's the feeling that you're sort of a bandwagoner kind of person. oh, you only like them because they started winning. You only like them because they have a championship or the like, or you only like them because the quarterback or the pitcher is cute or something like that. That there's an undermining to the authenticity of your fandom, even if you're able to explain the game considerably better and spout off 1,000 more statistics than the person sitting next to you. Very often, for women, really in particular, and I have to give the Red Sox organization in particular kudos for trying to make it much more family friendly and much more female friendly in an effort to try to get rid of some of this, that you are an authentic fan no matter how old you are, no matter who you are, because otherwise I think a lot of folks would just sort of crowd these people out, and they have they have the right to be there too, obviously.
Exactly. And I kind of hate this whole concept in sports of the whole fair weather fan, because let me tell you, I don't know too many other jobs where if you screw up and don't do it well, you righteously expect people to love you anyway.
Well, yeah, it's also that they expect people to love them even if they don't exert a lot of effort or a lot of obvious effort.
Yeah, I mean, my 20-something year career as a hairdresser, if I screw up your hair, and if I start screwing up a lot of people's hair, I can't expect to have a good reputation, I can't expect to have a lot of clients, and I certainly can't expect to have a lot money.
God, I would assume not. But it's directly related.
But if I were playing the sport ball, then suddenly it changes.
Well, yeah, because there's a hero worship that goes along with that kind of adds forgiveness into things that maybe aren't necessarily forgivable. I mean, and we've seen this with other things too.
If you've seen some of the haircuts I've had to fix, I deserve a little hero worship.
Hell yeah! That mullet, I'm gonna fix that mullet. I swear. That
color disaster that I fixed that allowed you to leave my shop with you looking human. You're welcome.
Oh, God.
So anyway, yeah. So we even have this age situatedness with Star Wars. If you came in with the prequels, you're not a real fan. If you came in with The Force Awakens, you're not a real fan. So all fandoms do this. I think the only fandom that I've ever personally participated in that didn't do that was the Addams Family.
That's interesting. So people don't distinguish between the lovers of the film and the lovers of the television show?
You know what? People do distinguish. Like for myself, my fandom is, I'm more interested in the 1964 TV series and to an extent the original Charles Addams cartoons from the New Yorker. I am not a fan of the films. However, I am not mean to people who are. And other people like me aren't mean to people who are, versus people who came in with the films or the musical, which I am also a fan of the musical. I just don't care for the films all that much for reasons that are my own, but I feel that are pretty valid. But the people come in later. There's just I haven't really seen that presumed ageism or discrimination based on the entry point there. I recently saw on Tumblr somebody complaining about it, but honestly, in the 2 years that I've been on Tumblr participating in Addams Family, this is the first grumbling I've seen of it.
Huh. Hey, hopefully it's the last of it.
Hey, the Addams Family, I honestly have to say it's the nicest fandom on there. And, a lot of it, I'm sure a lot of people who populate the fandom, they're more on the goth side. They probably wear a lot of black, that kind of thing, or at least that's the persona that they project. So, goths get a lot of discrimination too because they don't look a certain way, the way the society dictates is acceptable. And, maybe they have a lot of tattoos, a lot of piercings, but damn if they aren't the nicest people that I've ever participated in the fandom with. So, put away your judgy pants if you've been mean to goths. So we're probably running out of time on this issue. So I will just say that certain characters and certain ships, from the relationship, they also occupy positions of privilege within the fandom. If you're a Star Trek Enterprise fan, you probably remember the bloody Trip and T'Pol versus Archer and T'Pol shipper wars that got pretty nasty and bloody for a while, and it was because Trip and T'Pol occupied this area of privilege because it was by most definitions canon in that they actually had an active romantic and sexual relationship on screen, whereas T'Pol and Archer did not. And so because of this privilege came a sense of entitlement that maybe the Archer and T'Pol fans felt was not earned.
I just found myself getting sick of both sets, to be honest with you.
I can imagine that, they annoyed everybody. Now, I kind of came in sort of that there was already rubble and the fires were still smoldering. But, the shots had, the grenades and the rocket launchers had, for the most part, been put away, and it just kind of reduced to pot shots at that point. But, and I'll admit, I'm a huge fan of Trip and T'Pol just because, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that I find Connor Trenier very engaging and attractive. But, I'm not turning my nose up at a good Archer and T'Pol story either. I'm not going to dismiss it out of hand. I just have my preference, and you go girl or you go boy if Archer and T'Pol is your thing, or if Trip and Archer is your thing. For the longest time there were similar bloody wars between heterosexual ships and slash ships, and I've noticed within recent years, especially as we had worked towards marriage equality and stuff, even a lot of those wars have calmed down. Thank God. And people are becoming a little bit less judgmental of what people like to read and write. So that's cool too. And then if you're in a slash community, then obviously slash is going to be the privileged position overhead. So, just a long story short, to kind of summarize here, your position of privilege within the fandom is the location from which alpha nerding is performed. So it's all contextual. It can be men, it can be women, it can be white people, it can be people of color. It doesn't matter. There's all these mitigating factors of intersectionality that we talked about. But when you think about fandom and why it gets fractured and broken sometimes, privilege and entitlement that comes with it has a lot to do with it.
Definitely. So I'm gonna segue over to something that has I think people feel that this fractures fandom, but the truth is it probably only fractures a very small section of the fandom, and that is the good old Axanar lawsuit.
Ooh.
Yes, I know. It's still going, and there's been a lot of news lately.
Yes, there has. So, what are you gonna unpack for us today?
All right. So first off, there's a ton of documents. I mean, really, no lie, over 1,000 pages of documents in the last week and a half or so. Scary huge. But the reason why is because the last date for motion practice was very recent, and both sides moved for summary judgment. And what summary judgment means in the law is that essentially what you're making a motion, you're trying to get it so that stuff is just decided without even going to a jury. And your standards of proof are basically that there are no material questions of fact, and that the law, given these these facts says, yeah, you got to win this, and you can get partial summary judgment for that matter. So recognize it doesn't have to be this all or nothing thing. My material facts, what I mean is, we don't really care what day they started filming, let's say, but we do care more about maybe where money had gone, or what the intent was behind how certain things were created for the film. And let me back up a little bit and give some information to people who may not know about this case. Axanar was a fan film. It was intended to be a fan film, and it was originally created a couple of years ago. They created a smaller portion for about 20 minutes long called Prelude to Axanar, and that was crowdfunded for, I think it was $150,000. And then they opened up another Kickstarter, and they earned a lot more. There was a Kickstarter, and then there was an Indiegogo, and it may even have been a second Indiegogo. And forgive me for not maybe getting all of those names and dates right, but again, those aren't necessarily material facts for what I'm talking about right now. But what happened was that they raised about $1.5 million. And in the meantime, they put out a 2-minute scene called the Welcome Scene. And they also put out what they called an annual report, quote unquote. And what that did was, it was in an effort to show where money had gone. And that included salaries. Well, the minute that the IP holders, CBS and Paramount, got wind of that, they said, hey, wait a second. This is personal benefit from the unauthorized use of our IP. We're going to sue for copyright infringement. So almost a year ago, about 11 months ago, they sued Alec Peters, who is the principal of Axanar Productions, and Axanar Productions itself. They sued in California Central District Court, which is a federal court, and they sued under copyright infringement. This is not trademarks, copyright. Now, copyright can be, you can enforce it at your pleasure. So just because other films or other organizations have not been sued is utterly immaterial.
Right, and, like the whole, you let Susie and Johnny do it, why not me? That's not a thing here.
Yeah, law doesn't care about that. This is, you can tell everybody else, hey, come over and play in the pool, but not you. So there was a motion to compel discovery ruling because discovery had been going back and forth. Obviously, they took depositions and whatnot, and a motion came down from plaintiff's side because they wanted to get some more documents, and they also applied for an order because what was happening was they had called in Mr. Peters, and they also called in some of the other major players, including director Robert Meyer Burnett, and both of those people had been asked to bring certain documents to their depositions, and they did not. So instead, what happened was the plaintiffs got this from independent witness Christian Gossett. Christian Gossett had been the director of Prelude. He produced thousands of emails, or rather, I think it was hundreds of emails representing thousands of pages, and he had all of the stuff that the other two guys did not have. So there was a push to try to get them to say on the record that this was everything and that there wasn't anything else, and that kind of got that was only semi-allowed, and what ended up happening was plaintiffs were allowed to depose Mr. Peters a second time. So anyway, with all of that background, two summary judgment motions have come down. They are going to be argued on December 19th, and then presumably the court will rule on them, and we'll get some sort of a decision probably before the first week in January or around that time, because we're right about that time is when a pretrial conference has been scheduled, and then trial is scheduled for the end of January, and both sides have asked for a jury. So let me tell you a little bit about these summary judgment motions.
Okay.
Now, plaintiffs, one of the things that happened, and it's a little bit of sort of a side issue, is between the two parties, the defense had requested that, or had required that certain portions of certain court documents be redacted. And what redacted means, redaction, is when you black out a certain piece of something in order to keep it out of the eyes of the public, basically. And I mean, back when I was practicing law, we used to redact stuff with a magic marker, and then you photocopy it a second time, and there you go. Well, things have changed, and what often people will do is they will just put a black bar over something in Word, and then once they've saved that up into PDF, unfortunately that redaction can be gotten around really easily. And the truth is, the person who got around this wasn't even trying to. He just wanted to copy and paste it so that he could get it into a form that his phone could read. And and he looked at this and said, "Hey, wait a second. There's 3 extra lines of this or whatever that I'm not supposed to be seeing." Well, plaintiffs' lawyers realized that this had happened. They filed a quick motion to the court and said, which basically took a lot of legalese to say, "Oh my God, we screwed up. Please, 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 let's forget this ever happened and put in the redacted stuff instead." And of course, the court said, "Yeah, of course. Oh my God, let's fix this." Because the barn door's been open and that horse has been running away for a while. We're going to try to corral it back.
Sorry. I just wanted to know, because the listeners might not know, and I'm not even sure that I know, why would the redaction be necessary? What kind of information would they redact, and what does it mean in terms of access from the public, somebody trying to read court documents?
Yeah. Well, the way that I get these court documents is I get them through a site called Pacer, which is run by the federal courts, and anybody can do this. You just pay for this stuff. Yeah, my 1,000 documents, I paid for that stuff. And but when a document is redacted, it's because very often it's something personal. It could be something like a trade secret will get redacted. It's kind of funny, but true. Back when I was practicing, very often your Social Security was not the thing that got redacted. Times have changed, obviously. Now we look at that and say, "Oh my God, we're going to cover that up so that there isn't identity theft." But way back then, when I was in tort practice, what we would do very often, we would take a name, a date of birth, and a Social Security number, and you could run a check on somebody to see if they had prior accidents in order to try to determine whether they had injured that same body part before. So that, if they said that they couldn't walk, well, if they couldn't walk 2 years ago when the first time they had an accident, then that would tell you that the damages that they had suffered in whatever is a second accident maybe aren't quite so bad. So there was use for that information. But now we would absolutely cover that stuff up. Now, the information that was being covered here was information about how the crowdfunding money had been spent, which I have to say, I don't think it should have been redacted. I don't think there was a need for it, but defense really, they went to the mat for this. So, lo and behold, the merry mix-ups continue. But the merry mix-ups this time aren't on the plaintiff's side. The merry mix-up now is on the defense side. So the defendants, their lawyers, they went through motion practice on this, which means it's time and money, because even though these people are representing Mr. Peters and Axanar Productions pro bono, it still costs the firm money because these lawyers and paralegals can't bill for this. So, this is funds that they could have gotten, and they can't because, you don't. These people can't work beyond a certain number of hours. So they did all this work to try to get all this stuff redacted, and then when they filed their motions, this is a defense motion, they filed it unredacted.
Oh man!
So they didn't even do it poorly. which plaintiffs did. They didn't do it at all. And I want to say also, today is November 21st, 2016. And I looked before we started recording. So it was about 8 o'clock Eastern time, which is 5 o'clock California time. I looked to see if there was any sort of emotion or anything from defense doing that same sort of thing where they were telling the court, "Oh my God, we screwed up! Please, let's fix this, fix it, fix it." I'm obviously paraphrasing it, but that's
that's what my students sound like sometimes.
Well, we have to say it with much longer words. We have to use the word heretofore or something like that because it's the law. But anyway. They didn't. So here this stuff came out on I believe it was the 16th. Yeah, the 16th was the deadline for motion practice. And here it is, the 21st. So they had 3 full business days to try to get the genie back in the bottle. They did not. So they went through all of this mishigas, all this hullabaloo, to try to get this stuff redacted and keep it out of the public's view. I mean, of course, if it ended up in trial, then a jury would probably see it. But they didn't want the general public to see this. But here they've had 3 full days, and they have not tried to reel it back in. Therefore, I have no qualms whatsoever against reading this stuff on the air.
So before we read that on the air, I just kind of want to ask, why would they not try to get a do-over on that? Like, do they figure that since the redaction mishap, the genie's already out of the bottle anyway, so it doesn't matter, or would this just be an oversight on their part? Like why would this happen?
If it is an oversight, then there is a possibility that there's negligence here, and I don't want to impute that to these folks because I think that they're fine professional attorneys. So that makes me wonder if there's something else going on.
Okay.
As for what else could possibly be going on, why would you make this stuff come out to the public? Because the truth is, it doesn't really make that client look that good. However, I do have to say that the source for this maybe is something that they can not necessarily impeach, but maybe it's something that they can kind of and you can't really hand wave it away, but you may be able to go in front of a jury and say, well, this is the way this is written is from plaintiff's perspective, because this document, what I'm talking about here is its responses to interrogatories. These were interrogatories that defendant asked certain questions and plaintiff answered them. And this is the stuff that was supposed to be redacted, was the plaintiff's answers, not the defense answers. So the plaintiff's answers in this are based upon stuff that they got in other parts of discovery, things that didn't end up in these motions.
Oh.
Yeah. So this is actually kind of second tier. So maybe defense can come back and say, well, yeah, they said all of this stuff, but ... fill in here. However, if you're a lawyer, law practice pays, on average, at least $50,000 a year. And most lawyers work a good 40 or so years. It's a sedentary occupation, which means that a law license is worth at least $2 million. And these folks here, they make way more than that. They make something like $100,000, $200,000 per year on average. So they're making 2 and 4 and 6 or whatever times that. So if you're going to lie on a court pleading, which is subject to perjury, and if you keep doing that, you're going to get sanctioned by the bar, and you do that enough times, you get disbarred for that stuff. You better be doing it for some serious cabbage, because your license is worth so much more money than any small little thing that you might try to dicker around to get an advantage on.
Yeah, that would be nuts.
Yeah, it's and the truth is, when a lawyer really, really screws up, and they do lie on court pleadings, which I'm absolutely not saying these people are, because I'm sure that they're not. But when a lawyer does something like that, it's virtually always because they've got like a substance abuse problem. They've got something else going on that's where they're really, really throwing caution to the wind. So I am sure that nobody's lying on these pleadings. I'm sure of that. But are they pushing it in their direction to make it sound most favorable for them? Hell yeah, of course they are. So, they're going to leave out the stuff where Alec Peters maybe talks about taking in stray kittens or feeding the children, and instead they're going to talk about this.
Okay. So, is there anything that we can talk about, or do we need to wait for the next wave of paperwork?
Well, I'd like to read at least a little bit of this off, and you want to talk about this?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So, I am going to have to scroll while I'm talking here, so every now and then there's going to be a tiny bit of silence, and that's why. So the question is, identify and describe the harm or injury you claim to have suffered as a result of defendant's actions. Here's the response. Defendant Alec Peters raised over $1 million from Star Trek fans based on his announced intent to create an, quote, independent Star Trek film, end quote. Mr. Peters called his independent Star Trek film Star Trek Axanar. Mr. Peters took the funds obtained from fans of plaintiff's Star Trek intellectual property, and he produced and released a 20-minute film entitled Star Trek Prelude to Axanar. By the way, none of that stuff is in dispute.
Right.
After the completion and release of this 20-minute film, Mr. Peters continued to raise money from fans of plaintiff's intellectual property, and he paid himself and his then-girlfriend, and that would be a woman named Diana Kingsbury, tens of thousands of dollars in, quote, salary, end quote, in connection with this Axanar project.
Wow. So let me, just to kind of put this in regular people terms, fan films are supposed to be a hobby. It's not something that you're supposed to make your life work out of. It's not something that you're supposed to make a profit on. It's like fan fiction that way. You're not supposed to write your stories and then turn around and sell them to other people without Star Trek executives' knowledge or permission. And what this is saying is that Alec Peters paid himself and his girlfriend and other people a salary to do something that's supposed to be a hobby.
Exactly. And when the complaint came down for this case, that's one of the things that they expressly said was that Peters was taking personal benefit. So let me continue. Mr. Peters also took the money obtained from fans and rented out a studio in Valencia, California. Mr. Peters' stated intent in doing so was to create a film studio using funds from Star Trek fans that he could utilize in the future to create for-profit projects. Mr. Peters' production team generated a marketing plan for his project, stating that the first goal of Axanar Productions, Mr. Peters Corporation, was to complete the Star Trek Axanar film, while the second objective of Axanar Productions was to create and develop new models of sponsorship and funding that will help Axanar Productions generate profits on low-budget productions. Robert Meyer Burnett testified that this was an objective that he had discussed with Alec Peters, and the co-writer of the feature-length Star Trek Axanar screenplay, Bill Hunt, stated while he was working on the film that, quote, "My understanding has been that we're trying to make the best independent professional Star Trek feature film that's ever been done, and in the process, to help build a successful independent filmmaking studio that benefits us all," end quote.
So what we have here is an admission that it's not a hobby, that they intend to profit off of Star Trek without any kind of licensing agreement in which Star Trek would get paid, because that's customary. And not only would they do this once, they would do it over and over and over again every time somebody rents the studio from them to make a film.
Exactly. There's more. Mr. Peters personally profited from plaintiff's intellectual property by paying himself with funds raised from consumers of plaintiff's intellectual property. If this sounds repetitious, it is. And by spending tens of thousands of dollars of those funds on his own personal expenses. Mr. Peters used fan-raised funds to pay for, here's where it gets interesting, the tires on his Lexus to service his car, to pay for his gas each and every week for nearly 2 years, to pay for his girlfriend's gas for the same time period, to pay for 2 years of personal phone bills from himself, his girlfriend, and Robert Meyer Burnett, to pay for his health insurance, his car insurance, his annual AAA memberships, his TSA airport pre-check fee.
Oh my God.
And his personal travel to conventions both in the United States and internationally. Mr. Peters also used these funds to pay for tens of thousands of dollars in restaurant meals. Mr. Peters and his girlfriend were provided with debit cards that they used to pay for these expenses from the Axanar Productions account, which account was populated with funds contributed by Star Trek fans. Further, Mr. Peters' company, PropWorks, is housed in a studio facility that was rented and built out using funds from Star Trek fans. PropWorks has not paid any rent to Axanar Productions for use of this facility.
Wow. Okay, so there's a lot to digest in just that little
Yes.
chunk right there. But the first thing that I want to address is the fact that I have seen a lot of Axanar apologists say that, well, meals and travel and gas and phones are legitimate business expenses, and you'd be correct if Axanar was a legitimate business. It's not, it's theft.
Yeah, once again, it comes back, it keeps coming back to personal benefit, private benefit, because no matter how much you may want to believe that this is legitimate and wonderful and perfect and lovely and the angels are singing about it, but his TSA pre-check fee?
Right, like how would that even be a necessary business expense? Like your need to get in line ahead of other people isn't a necessity, it's a convenience.
Yes. Your health insurance. Health insurance is important. Hey, awesome. You've got health insurance. That's great. Don't do it on the backs of somebody else's IP. Now, Mr. Peters has said more than once, this was my full-time job and I got paid for it because I needed to eat and stuff like that. But I ask you, who asked you to make this your full-time job?
Right, it's supposed to be a hobby. I keep coming back to that because it keeps being true.
Yeah, and this is an intelligent person with a Juris Doctorate. You can get lots of different jobs with a Juris Doctorate, and let me tell you, I've had lots of them. It's certainly possible to go out there and get regular old work with a Juris Doctorate. Maybe it's not as glamorous, but there's plenty of work for people with JDs.
So if you donated to any of the Axanar campaigns, or if you bought any of the illegal Klingon coffee, just understand that he's been out there playing big shot Hollywood producer on your dime.
Yes. So where do you go from here?
I don't know, Janet. Where do we go?
Well, plaintiffs only asked for partial summary judgment. They actually didn't ask for the whole shebang, because what they want is for the court to declare that there's been infringement. Because once that happens, basically, that means liability is conceded, and that the only thing that a trial would require is damages determination. That's actually an awesome strategy, because what that does is it gives you a really easy case, and it puts it into very much of the public. It's really, really hard to suppress records that come from a jury verdict, from a jury determination. On the defense side, what they said was real interesting. Defense, let me find this quick. Defense gave 3 reasons why they felt that this case should be summary judgment for them. Now, I haven't read every single line of the defense stuff, so please keep that in mind because, like I said, there's tons of it. But they laid out 3 alleged separate grounds for granting summary judgment for them. One of them was they said that the plaintiff's claims are premature because the feature film has not been completed. However, Judge Klausner already rejected this when the defense tried to move for dismissal in like March or so of this year. So that argument was already shot down. Number 2, quote, none of plaintiff's alleged works in this action are substantially similar to defendant's works, end quote.
What?
Yeah, that was interesting. But it gets better. Because in their motion, they said, and I quote, none of the defendant's works are substantially similar to plaintiff's works. Plaintiffs own a limited number of Star Trek episodes and films, but they do not own a copyright to the idea of Star Trek or the Star Trek universe as a whole. Defendant's works do not borrow sufficient material from the heart of any of plaintiff's works to be considered substantially similar to or derivative of any particular episode or film owned by plaintiffs. And if you're scratching your head, then so am I. Because
what the actual hell?
Yeah. All right. Okay. The Star Trek universe only exists because of all of these constituent elements that are part of it. The Klingons, the Vulcans, Ambassador Saval, Trip and T'Pol, Wesley Crusher. All of this stuff is part of the Star Trek universe. And, what is interesting to me is that several months ago, when defense was arguing some other motion, they said that that the plaintiffs could not argue about ownership of the individual constituent elements, and now they're saying that the plaintiffs can't argue about the universe, and it's like, make up your mind. At some point, it's like this is what the IP is. The IP is its pieces, and the IP is also its whole.
Well, and keep in mind too, like, depending on what you as the consumer want to get out of a fan work, I would arguably say that a piece of fan fiction or a fan film has to be similar enough to the source material in order to be identifiable, in order for it to work. If you're gonna make a Star Trek fan film and name the characters Kirk and Spock, but you're setting it in, a 21st century coffee shop, and it's the shenanigans of their dopey friends and neighbors, that's not Star Trek. You've just slapped the names Kirk and Spock on them. So for Axanar to say that they did not sufficiently borrow enough of it is a lot of crap. If you've seen Prelude to Axanar, those tunics are recognizable. Those ships are recognizable. You even hired the same flipping actor to play a Vulcan character.
I can come up easily with a good 10 or so areas where they wholesale copied, and it's really recognizable. And I can do this off the top of my head. Saval, which is the Vulcan character that you just mentioned, the Klingon race, the planet Vulcan, and Mount Seleia.
Yep.
John Gill is mentioned. He's from Patterns of Force. Vulcans themselves as a species. The United Federation of Planets and its flag. The character of Chang, who was a Klingon from Undiscovered Country. Ship designs, this would be all of them. They all have that design sensibility. Uniform designs and insignia. Now, apparel is kind of a weird case. Apparel actually can't be copyrighted. However, the insignia can. And, of course, star of the show, Garth Bizar.
Right.
I find these arguments to be kind of disingenuous. It really does make you wonder about what defense counsel is trying. And I mean, I'm sure that when they took this case, they knew it was going to be an uphill battle. I think they didn't realize just quite how steep it was. And this is, I think, to a certain extent, kind of a last hurrah. They may have felt that there was no way to do anything at the trial level, so it's all been a lot of lovely motion practice to try to make a record for appeal. I'm not sure. It's entirely possible that neither of these motions will succeed. In fact, that's more likely to be the case, because I think that the judge is probably going to say that there are too many material facts in contention. So neither side will succeed. But this has been rather educational in terms of what the parties are talking about, what they testified about, under penalty of perjury, folks. And what is most important, I think, to the donors is to see this information that has come out. And even if the donors don't believe it, and maybe you don't, or maybe you feel that okay, but you don't care, it's still got to kind of give you some pause, if nothing else. And also, I think that even if you hey, you want to hate me, awesome, you go for it. You want to hate plaintiffs' counsel, awesome. They get paid either way. They don't care. You want to hate CBS and Paramount, knock yourself out. But what should be really interesting, I think, to people is to see the contradictions also. That they have this information, which was gathered from statements, interrogatory answers, depositions, and whatnot, that have all been certified under penalty of perjury, versus what they're seeing on social media.
I have a real problem with the Axanar apologists and deniers kind of burying their heads in the sand in the face of legal court documents, people. It's, if you want to be honest and say, hey, I don't care that Alec Peters was eating sushi and driving a Lexus with brand new tires on my dime, that's fine. You probably would have saved a lot of people time and trouble and agony if you would have just wrote him a check to Bell Tire.
Yeah.
But just the people who claim it's not true, it's okay, it's to me, it's just symptomatic of, number one, the overall climate of anti-intellectualism in our society right now. And the idea of, if I couch this as my opinion, nobody can tell me that I'm wrong. So what I see is a lot of people actually not reading the court documents, because if they don't see it, if they're not confronted with it, it's not real, and they can stick their fingers in their ears and go, la, 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 I'm not listening to you. And still have this construction in their heads that has absolutely no resemblance to reality. And, if that's going to lose us a couple of listeners, I don't care.
Yeah, it's disingenuous, I think.
Not all opinions are created equally. Not all opinions are informed, and facts are always going to trump your opinion.
Yeah. I mean, well, it's, this is where I get, folks who have opinions about the court case, who feel that there's an equivalence to my education. And, I mean, I freely admit that I'm not an IP lawyer, and I never was, but I still did go to law school, and I still did practice law. And, I have a means of researching this stuff that is a bit different from a layman, and this is my background. And again, while I'm not going to tell you that I'm the big be all and end all expert here, I do kind of know what I'm talking about.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, and aliens and cats and whoever else is out there, that is an informed opinion.
Sparrows, too. Don't forget the sparrows.
The sparrows, right?
It's the joke. For real, there's a sparrow living in my porch light, so that's why we're not turning it off at night. It's to keep our sparrow warm.
Right. So, wow. So, did we have anything else on Axanar today?
Nothing in particular. Like I said, we're going to see decision on, or rather, we're going to see the oral arguments will be on the 19th. We will see some back and forth on this. I'm sure there's going to be yet more stuff for me to read. I have there's the ex parte request for relief. That's actually scheduled to go out. The blog about that. The blog about the plaintiff's summary judgment motion was completed, and that's scheduled to go out, I believe, at the beginning of December. Some of these I may push up earlier, particularly if I'm starting to see more stuff, just so that I don't dump everything on people all at once. I really have no intention of doing this over the Thanksgiving holiday, but hey, if there's downtime and if my parents are driving me nuts, sorry, no, that never ever happens. If I have downtime, then I might take a look at it, but I'm not expecting to finish it over the holiday weekend to work on the defense stuff.
And just to give people an idea of what the sheer volume of the paperwork that's been generated recently in terms of court documents that were recently released and all the redaction and all that stuff. I, as a PhD student, I'm taking a full course load of 3 classes, each of which on a weekly basis will make me read anywhere from 50 to 150 pages for each class.
Okay.
On top of that, there's my own personal research and any supplemental reading that I have to do in order to do responses. So think about the fact that I could be reading anywhere from, we'll just average it and say maybe like 200 to 300 pages a week, sometimes as much as 500, just in the course of my coursework. This isn't, anything that my students generate and write, nothing like that. So the amount of paper that's been generated by Axanar in this last release of documents is about 3 weeks worth of my work, on the average.
And for anybody who thinks that this is some happy little thing that I'm doing on the side, although it is, I've also spent a few $100s on documents for this. But that's one of the reasons why I blog about this stuff and why I put this out there and why I will blog about this even if the case settles tomorrow. Not only because I pay for this stuff, but also because you are the general public, and I think that anybody who's listening is probably going to have an interest in this stuff, because even if it settles, even if it goes away, the arguments are of interest to folks who like fandom of any sort. It doesn't have to be Trek. That there's the questions of intellectual property and about how far a fan film can go and how far a fan fiction writer can go. I think that those are very relevant, even if you're for the My Little Pony fandom, for that matter, for anybody.
Yeah, everybody's going to be feeling the ripple effects of this, and that's exactly why I started following the case. Not only because I am a Star Trek fan, I really don't pay much attention to the world of fan films. Fan fiction has been more my life. But this is going to have ripples into fan fiction. It's going to have ripples into other fandoms. So, hey, bronies, heads up.
Yeah, exactly. So, and speaking of different fandoms, let's move on. We have another case, and this has been, the blog is actually already on the site, and it is the Dr. Seuss Enterprises versus Comic Mix et al., and that includes David Gerald. We did mention him, but the blog post is out there because the case went to, there was a complaint in the California Southern District, also federal. But this is a bit different. This case is not just a copyright infringement case.
I was just about to go match game on you and go, how different is it?
Well, I'll tell you. So it's not just a copyright case. This is also a trademark case. And they also sued under a California statute that, which is, the gist of it is about unfair trade competition. So, now, and you can do this, by the way, even though the California law is state law, the other two parts of this lawsuit are federal. And under what's called the doctrine of judicial economy, because the fact pattern doesn't change, the courts say, hey, shovel this all together instead of creating two separate cases and, two juries and all this other nonsense. We don't want to do that. Put it all together. So you can bring the California law into this. It's no problem.
It sounds very efficient.
Yes. Well, it's one of the only things that we do that's efficient in the law. I'll tell you that right now. So the first thing about trademark is trademark actually has to be zealously defended. So the Seuss Enterprises had to jump on this really quickly. And trademark has a lot to do with sort of like more of the look and feel of things. And Seuss, if you've ever read a Dr. Seuss book, which is probably everybody who listens to this podcast, you will notice a few things that are obvious right off the bat. One of them is the style of the illustrations. Another one is the rhyming, the poetic meter, the cadence. Another one is the use of odd terminology, kind of made up words very often in an effort to create rhyming and for everything to scan properly. So that's basically the trademark of Seuss, if you will, is those three things, where you have, either Horton, Here's a Who, and the Grinch and stuff like that. So that's one piece of this. The unfair competition part is once again, let me go back because we did talk about this. I don't really want to repeat myself too much, but the Seuss case is what happened was David Gerald, who is a Star Trek writer, actually, he wrote The Trouble with Tribbles for the original series. He wrote this book. It was edited, it was and illustrated and published. And this book is called The Places You'll Boldly Go. And according to the complaint, it takes from a number of authorized licensed Seuss works, which include The Places You'll Go, The Sneetches. I'm blanking, but there were a few others. So it takes from a few of them, puts them together, kind of mashes it up, and gives it a Star Trek feel. Now, CBS and Paramount are not suing in this one. They may join later, whether it's a cross-claim or perhaps they could put in what's called an amicus curiae brief, where they join in a brief, but they don't really join in the case. They just sort of put their 2 cents in, basically. And what Seuss Enterprises, which is the people who handle the Seuss IP, because Theodore Geisel passed away a few years ago. What they said was that the intention was to compete directly in the marketplace for people who are fans of Seuss, and as a result, that's basically the damages that they're looking at is that folks who would have bought a book by Seuss might be confused. They might buy this instead. What also gets interesting is, because it's a copyright case, just like the Axanar case, willful infringement brings with it up to $150,000 per infringement as the penalty.
Wow.
This is why in the Axanar case they're trying to prove willful, which is that laundry list of all that stuff that I read. They're talking about whether it was willful, and because Mr. Peters has a law degree, he may not necessarily be presumed to know the law about this, but he certainly would have an idea that maybe this is an issue. With Mr. Gerald, it's a different story, because Mr. Gerald had blogged for Axanar after the lawsuit came down. So he had very good idea that people who use IP without permission are probably going to get sued. But there's even more, because the California, I know but wait, there's more. The California statute does it one better, because the California statute allows for treble damages. So we ain't just talking about $150,000 per infringement. Could be talking about $450,000.
Holy crap!
Yeah, it's like that. The stuff is on the site. The blog post is on this site. It is, and it shows the complaint gives the side-by-side comparisons of various pictures, and they are, I have to say, they really are damning. Its color is the same, curvature is the same, character look and feel is the same. Now, once again, same as the defense in Axanar. The little tiny constituent elements, the curve of an ear and stuff like that, that's really not copyrightable. But when you put them all together, then you've got something. And that's what we've got here. You can't say that the curvature of a line is copyrightable, because God knows that's not. But when you put that together with the color scheme and things like people waiting on a line, but it's not a straight line, so it's a snaky line, and it's the exact same shape, snaky line. There's a woman with a baby carriage in the original, and there's a woman with a baby carriage in the knockoff. There's mountains in the background in the knockoff, mountains in the background in the original. The cadence is the same. The rhyming scheme is the same. It absolutely comes across as being a faithful adaptation, a faithful copy, and but it's interesting because it's a mashup. So is it an infringement on Shrek? And I would have to say, I'm not so sure that it is. It might very well be considered to be a parody or a satire of Shrek. It could come out like that. And it's very possible that this book was put together in an effort to try to poke the CBS Paramount bear, to try to get them to litigate this. And they're not playing ball, at least not now.
And, I don't have a law degree, but I do have a degree in writing and rhetoric. Mm-hmm. And from a rhetorical standpoint, I would argue that Dr. Seuss is the tool being used to make Star Trek satire. So Star Trek is being satirized, but Dr. Seuss is not, and that's why you would lose the satire argument against Dr. Seuss.
Yeah, Seuss is the vehicle. It's as if I was. I could plunk this down into and maybe tell a Star Trek story in the style of Ernest Hemingway. And if I used choppy sentences and heavy male iconography, you may or may not realize that I'm trying to do it in the style of Hemingway, and maybe I could get away with that. But this is way too obvious. It's way too close.
Well, and the idea too, he was going to sell this book, correct? The idea was to make a profit.
Oh, hell yeah.
So we're not even talking about the fan artist who might like Dr. Seuss or just think it would be funny to do something Star Trek in the style of Dr. Seuss, but you did it for fun. And, you just put it on your personal Tumblr or something to show people, haha, look at this funny thing that I did, how awesome. And that's that.
Yeah. Once again, it's what is the damage here? And the damage is confusion. Are you getting product confusion? But it's also, are they is the one who created the product confusion? Did they make did they get any kind of personal benefit from it? And that doesn't have to be profit. You could be a horrible business person You can be terrible. You can be losing money big time on this stuff, but you still can get essentially a benefit from it, from getting recognition, getting goodwill, getting people to associate your name with this, even if it's unfairly. And it's the same thing with taking the Axanar salary, I might add. Even if the Axanar salary is taken and then it's put back, even if that money is put back with interest, it still gave a benefit to the person who took that money out, whether that was to beef up their bank account in order to increase their credit score, or impress somebody they were trying to date, or for any other reason.
Or to convince the world that you're a big shot Hollywood producer.
Or anything else that you want to use it for. Yeah, you like even numbers and you wanted to make an even number. Who the hell knows? But whatever it was, there was a benefit to that. It's not necessarily a huge benefit, and maybe damages in the Axanar or in the Seuss case, maybe neither of them are going to be terribly high. I mean, maybe that's what will happen is the damages are moderate. But it still doesn't mean that defense should win. That just means that plaintiff wins, although they maybe don't get a big payday from it. But hey, you don't necessarily take these cases for a big payday.
Right. You sometimes take these cases to just make something stop or whatever.
And that's really what the motivation is behind these things, is to stop this stuff in its tracks, because it's also not only do IP holders look at what's happening today, but they look at what might be happening in the future. Because when you start to allow some of these things to get away with it here and there and everywhere, then it's gonna keep going. It's gonna keep going. What does Picard say? The line is drawn here and it goes no further. And that's the way that an IP holder has to think. And that is, in fact, what the law is for trademark, is that you've got to be zealous and you've got to defend it, because otherwise you're going to lose it. People are going to look at, white letters on red background that look kind of scripty, and they're going to say, look at that, that's Coca-Cola, even if what you've got is something else. But they don't require this for copyright, because copyright is more complicated. However, a copyright IP, an IP holder will still sue in copyright in order to attempt to make a statement. Now, they might make decisions as to who they sue, and you might not like that. Might feel that those are unfair. That maybe they only go after people who've got pockets, who maybe have something that they can recover, but that's permitted.
Oh, and that's the thing too. There's got to be some kind of cost-benefit analysis that happens before you decide you're going to sue somebody. So, in the case of selectively suing fans or fan productions, I am sure that along the way it's probably crossed their mind, but there's the whole more trouble than it's worth thing. Just for example, back in the 80s, George Lucas went after a lot of fanzine producers, and he wanted them all shut down just because of one story that he read there's conflicting information about this. One said that it was a particularly graphic sex scene. Another one describes it as a rape. Not sure. But because this one story, he wanted everybody to stop. And finally, the lawyers at Lucasfilm just kind of decided, it's too hard to go after everybody. It's too hard to hunt them down, and you're going to spend more money than you're going to lose. So kind of like a shaky peace was reached after that point. And so I'm sure that in the case of Star Trek fan films and anything else, the powers that be have had to make a decision of, is this really going to be worth our time and money?
And fan goodwill too. I mean, it's I think that they felt that they had been pushed far enough, and they wanted it to stop, and that there was and that the line had gotten crossed. And the line probably was the salaries, I would guess. I mean, I do remember looking at the annual report, or rather, there was like just a page that I saw of it, and I saw the word salaries, and I remember telling Terry Schell he's going to get sued.
Yeah. I mean, it just that's just common sense fandom right there. Like, even though we know that there's other ways of getting personal benefit from something, rule number one of fandom is that you don't make money off of your hobby.
Yeah, that and it's an obvious line too. It should be a pretty obvious line to people because there are other benefits, including self-aggrandizement and popularity. I mean, we see this with popular fan fiction writers. They do get a certain degree of benefit from being popular, from people liking them, but that's also very hard to quantify.
Well, and we can't necessarily say that it harms the IP owner in any way either, just because, hey, I wrote this awesome story and I became a big name fan. Don't be on this doll where I hurt you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that most IP holders are not going to get too upset about, if you have, the example I can give you is from Wattpad, which is a personal publishing platform with, I don't know, I think now there's like 40 million users or something like that. And Anna Todd wrote they allow fiction about living people. And she wrote a fiction about the band One Direction. And she has the most popular story on Wattpad of all time. No lie. It's probably got 1 billion reads on it.
Wow.
And, it has multiple chapters, and there's lots of people, and a lot of them will read the same chapter over and over again.
Sure.
And it's not necessarily, nobody's doing anything unethical. It's that Wattpad also skews very young, so a lot of people just, they like it, they want to keep rereading it, they reread it. And she's legitimately Wattpad famous, and she actually got a book deal out of this. And she had to, change names, obviously, and wrote a book called After. One Direction actually didn't have a problem with this. They thought it was great that, this was a big fan. She was really happy. Her fans really loved her, and they really loved One Direction. They felt it was a synergistic relationship. But it's kind of a different story.
Oh, Janet, you cut out.
Oh, sorry. Whoops, sorry. They felt that it was a synergistic relationship, but that's not necessarily what's going to be happening with regular IP holders. Because with Trek or with Seuss or with My Little Pony or anything else, when it looks too close, when it gets that close, there are legitimate fan confusions. And when a fan is buying one and they would have bought another, there's harm.
Absolutely. And I think that's been part of Star Trek's thing for a while is, this perception that as long as we're making fan fiction and fan art and zines and fan films, it means that we're buying, we're buying a whole bunch of crap that's Star Trek, So as long as we're enthused, we're buying your crap. And I think for the most part, it's true. But now, and again, and this dovetails nicely into our opening topic with the alpha nerds. You get people trying to leverage their fan production against the IP holder. I mean, don't lie to me and say that, you hope to take over Star Trek.
Yeah, I think that would be considered an intent to harm, certainly, and it would certainly be considered willful.
And boycott Beyond because, hey, Axanar is better, whatever, So, I mean, they just proved infringement right there,
Certainly they proved damages, definitely.
Oh, for sure. And, one thing, too, when you brought up the real person fanfic, I think that maybe that's something that I would like to talk about on our next show, because tomorrow, Carrie Fisher's book, Diary of a Wandering Princess, is released. I pre-ordered it last winter after The Force Awakens came out, so it should be landing in my mailbox tomorrow. Yeah, and if you have been on the internet and not living under a rock, there has been an excerpt released in which Carrie confirms that she and Harrison Ford had an affair.
Woohoo!
Yeah, and so a lot of people ship real life Carrie and Harrison, and so I think that this would be a timely time to talk about real person fanfic, and hopefully by the time we record our next show, I will have read the book, or at least read most of it, and I can even talk about that a little bit.
Awesome. Yeah, that would. Yeah, sure. Let's make that at least one of our topics next time. I think we're running out of time.
Yeah, it's getting to be about that time. We gotta, leave time for credits.
Yes.
Which y'all better listen to, and y'all better not leave the movie theater without watching credits either.
Definitely, because you never know what that little thing in there. So thank you, everyone, and it is Thanksgiving week, so happy Turkey Day to all.
Yeah, and remember, as you dig into that turkey and that stuffing and those mashed potatoes and that green bean casserole, you are here by the grace of Indigenous people. So please remember Indigenous people as you have your meals, and think about what you're thankful for, and do what you can to support them.
Yep, and I would also say just have a lovely holiday, and holidays can be stressful, but Thanksgiving tends to be one I think that can be easier for folks because there are fewer expectations, and so try to enjoy your friends and family, and if you can't get together with somebody, hopefully you can get together with somebody else who can't get together with their friends.
And if you're going out for Black Friday, be good, play nice. I don't want to hear anything stupid about people punching each other out, shanking each other for some stupid toy or pair of tennis shoes or whatever. TV set, not worth it. Behave yourself.
Sounds good to me. All right, so thank you, and we will see you. We will see you next month.
See you next time. Peace out.
All right, take care. Bye bye.
Music provided by Invocation Array. Send mail to hosts@semanticshenanigans.com. Follow us on Twitter @2shenanigans. That's the number, not the word. 2shenanigans. On Facebook, you can find us @Semantic Shenanigans. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Semantic Shenanigans. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time right here on Semantic Shenanigans.